Welcome, everyone, to Urban Healers Podcast. I am your host, Stephanie Naylor-Lillard, and one of the mental health therapists associates at Urban Healing Counseling. Urban Healers Podcast and Urban Healing Counseling was founded by our CEO, Janaea Sadler, who cultivates an environment where asking for help is our greatest strength. Today, our podcast will be focused on emotional intelligence of the clinician. I am honored and super delighted to introduce our guest today, Dr. Nicole Johnson. Dr. Nicole, welcome to Urban Healers Podcast.
Stephanie, thank you so much. I am honored that you would invite me on to Urban Healers. Thank you for having me here. Yeah.
Oh, we are so delighted. I already told the users in the chat to just get ready. Their fingers are going to be on fire. You guys, we've got such a phenomenal guest with us. Dr. Nicole Johnson has her doctorate in clinical social work, and she is going to tell us a lot about herself. And then we're going to talk about emotional intelligence of the clinician. So, Dr. Nicole, before we get started, can you tell our listeners how long have you been in social work and, sort of what your specialties are?
Well, thank you for starting off with the how old are you question. I appreciate it. I think about this, and I honestly, Stephanie, I've been in this field for going on 25 years this year. And so it's been a long time. It's been a long journey. As anyone in this profession, particularly social workers, we know it can run the full gamut. So I wasn't necessarily clinical immediately. And I eventually went into clinical work in the Washington, D.C. area, which I am originally from, and worked a range of different agency sites, from partial hospitalization to step-down treatment facilities in terms of group homes, post-residential, school social work, private practice, group practice. And my specialty in terms of who I've worked with, it's changed. And I've worked initially with children and adolescents, loved it, told myself that was the only population I would ever work with. Worked with juveniles in detention facilities, all male. Told myself, got it. This is the only population I'll ever work with. Now I work with primarily adults, and I feel that this is the only population I'll ever work with. I say all that to say that I really genuinely loved working, across the entire developmental spectrum. And I right now I'm working with primarily adults, and I'm doing a lot of relational work, focusing on depression, anxiety, trauma, grief and loss, and relationship issues, attachment issues. So that's a little bit about me.
Oh, wow. I told you, audience, we were in for a treat today. Dr. Nicole, we had sort of a preliminary discussion, and we wanted to title this podcast, Emotional Intelligence for Clinicians. Can you tell us a little bit about that? That can be a wide range of things, from ensuring that we're modeling the right posture and behavior and doing the appropriate rapport building and, what our skill set should look like, as we continue this journey in this service and sharpen our intellectual prowess. Mm-hmm. So please tell us, Dr. Nicole, we are just waiting on the edge. I have several professionals in our network of social work that have already started asking questions, and let's give her a chance to, so before this area that she's talking about, because it is a hot topic, just across the spectrum, how do clinicians have a way of sharpening their skills and building their tools in their toolbox so they can help the genre of people that they want to support?
Absolutely. I don't think we give enough focus. I don't think we talk enough about this. First, therapists are humans first, right? And so it is so important for us to recognize that while we've been trained to do this work, we have to constantly check in with ourselves to make sure that we are ready to do this work and we're in a place to do this work. Let's start off with what we think emotional intelligence is. Emotional intelligence involves being able to regulate your emotions, being able to communicate effectively, being able to have an awareness of other people in terms of empathizing with other people, being able to understand someone else's emotional space, diffusing conflict, or that social awareness aspect of being able to interact with others, and being able to handle your own challenges effectively. Doesn't that sound like work that we always are doing with our clients? And so I ask, how can we effectively do that if we haven't done our own work? So that is why I think emotional intelligence is really important for us to do our own check-ins. A lot of times people look at emotional intelligence, like I said, through social awareness, emotional awareness, that emotional management piece, as well as kind of the coping strategies that you may use. As clinicians, and we'll get into this more, as clinicians, and particularly since COVID, we've been under the gun with a range of different needs and acuity, and people who I think are new to mental health. And I love it, right? And in terms of finally people are understanding the importance of mental health. But with that, you have us kind of feeling overwhelmed. You have us completing more sessions, having to navigate areas that perhaps are new to us, having to take on more responsibilities, being tapped or spread thin, as in most professions. And so with that, I think it's easy for a therapist to get in kind of a habit or a humdrum type of situation with seeing clients. I'm just going in, I'm checking in, I'm doing these appointments, and I'm going home. Our work is way too important for that. We have to bring ourselves in the room. So since we know we're dealing with these very intense and different variables, I think it's important for us to constantly check in with ourselves to make sure that we are aware of where we are emotionally. And if there are areas that we have to address, because we can have emotional lapses, but if there are areas of our intelligence that we have to grow or that we have to address, especially considering all of the variables that we're dealing with, and especially considering the impact that our own emotional intelligence makes with our clients. I know I said a whole bunch, but I hope that makes sense, because it really is important, and it's important to place it within context, as well as important to place it in terms of why our own intelligence plays such a big piece in the clinical space.
Well, Dr. Nicole, you have already taken us back to school, and we are in front of the classroom right now. And so in our chat, we do have several questions that are sort of framed around this.
Okay.
Several of the therapists, and some are mental health counselors and substance abuse counselors, and so many other types of counselors are asking, do you think it is better for a clinician to also see a therapist?
Now, I have a feeling that most of those therapists that ask that question already know the answer to that. Absolutely, yes. Think about the emotional work that therapists do every day. Think about the emotional aspect of our natural lives, of us living as full human beings. How can we show up as our full self, as an objective other, without unpacking our own stuff? And how do we actually address some of the emotional intelligence in terms of growth or maybe deficits if we're not unpacking it, whether in a clinical space or with a supervisor or mentor? So I think that I would say, I would encourage all therapists to do their own work. It helps you become a better therapist. It also helps you understand what it means to be on the other side of the table or on that other seat. I think having that experience is invaluable. So.
Wow. Well, you've got I see a lot of emojis and hand gestures in the chat right now, hand claps. Another question, quite a few, but from the same sort of context that I see in the chat is, how does a clinician know when transference and countertransference is happening with the client during session?
Excellent question. And I'd have to say first, if we're so full of stuff that we haven't unpacked, that's going to be hard to pick up on what's going on in the clinical space. That goes back to the first question as far as why it's so important to do your own work, right? The emotional intelligence aspect also leans into this, because having that self-awareness, having that ability to stay present, even when it's challenging, will give you the opportunity to know what's going on in the clinical space and how much of it is you and how much of it is them. So let's talk about countertransference and transference. Countertransference, obviously, is the stuff that comes from us, right? It's something that we may be picking up from our client. Traditionally, a lot of people see countertransference as something that we may be experiencing ourselves that may have something to do with our own stuff, our own relationships. Client might remind you of somebody. It may just be something in the room that's really your stuff to unpack. Transference is what's going on from the client's perspective. And that also could be that you remind them of someone, or that there's a reenactment going on in the room. There's something that's going on that could hinder or could help the process. I always say all information in the room is a help, because it's information. It's just about unpacking it. So whatever you do, and you have this transference, countertransference dynamic, it's about having that awareness of what's going on. I say we should always be a thermometer and a barometer in the room. You should always be checking for your client's temperature, and you should always be checking for your own. Okay. You should always see what's going on within yourself, and always being able to gauge, okay, how much of this is my client? How much of this is me? Can I give you an example, Stephanie? Is
Absolutely. Yes. I've got a lot of question marks in the chat going, can she give an example? So
absolutely.
yes.
Absolutely. I had a client. So the truth of the matter, Stephanie, I'm sure you could pick up in I'm pretty laid back. I am a laid back type of individual at times, but for the most part, that's my personality. Okay. I'm just being honest. That's that humanness, right? We're therapists, but we're humans first.
Yes.
It's interesting, because even though I prepare for a session, reading over my notes, making sure I understand patterns and themes, I generally enter a session wanting to be flexible and open, because I want the client to bring in what they want. There was a particular client, though, that I found myself preparing for like at least an hour before their session. And when I say preparing, I mean preparing. I brought out every book. I was making notes. I had things high. I had my highlighter out. I had different types of Post-its and stickies, things that I noticed I don't normally do. And I had to do some unpacking. And I realized I had anxiety about how I was being perceived in the room. And I brought that to the room. It took some time. It's important that it wasn't something that I brought to the room immediately. But after I assessed and realized some of it's my stuff, but I'm also dealing with a very anxious client, and I wonder how prepared she gets before our sessions. So I just brought my vulnerability out, and I said, I've noticed that I prepare a lot for our sessions, and I needed to unpack that. And I figured I get anxious. I wonder, do you get anxious before our sessions too? And it opened up a whole nother realm for her. But it also helped me understand the difference between what my client might be bringing in and what my stuff is, and being able to make a clear distinction between that, but also being able to use it as information in the room. I hope that makes sense, because I'm trying to use an example with countertransference and transference.
Oh, no, that was That was just absolutely great. You actually sort of demonstrated, sort of some core components there. You showed empathy for the situation and yourself. You were self-aware. You were able to sort of self-manage and continue the attunement and alignment with the client, which is awesome, with effective communication by going in and honoring the space to say, so I prepare a lot for my clients. And so the client was able to connect right with you, in that scenario. So
Stephanie, you're making me feel like I'm emotionally intelligent, and I appreciate that.
wow, doctor,
Because you've hit all components and I love it. You're absolutely, you're on it. So yes.
Yeah. And so this is we get a lot of questions, not just in the chat, but just, in our spaces where we, give talks or, to the community, where we do some community talks and sort of enlighten the community members on the types of services that we provide. Because sometimes people in the community may think it's limiting to be a social worker or provide, clinical social work services, to them. And so it's always fun to sort of getting there and unpack, what they think, just like we would do with clients. What do you think therapy is all about, and what do you hope to get out of this? And so that's something that I'm finding more and more education, and awareness about some of the things that we do in this phenomenal and awesome space.
Yes. Yes.
But Dr. Nicole, you hit on several key components, in our conversation today. And so we're going to have to ask you to come back for a part 2 and a part 3, if you don't mind.
I would be honored.
Here at Urban Healers Podcast.
I know I can be a little wordy, Stephanie, so you may have to invite me back a few times, and I get it. But, I enjoy you, and this has been amazing. I definitely would love to come back. I'd love to talk about just, how do we use emotional intelligence even outside of the room? How do we encourage our clients? How do we use psychoeducation in terms of helping our clients even understand that? I actually worked with a client recently where we talked about emotional intelligence in terms of what she would be looking for and her future dating scene or partner. So it's definitely something that extends well beyond the clinical space, right? And I would love to come back and talk about that or anything else, or just come and be in your presence, Stephanie. So you're great.
Well, I'm telling you, the chat is saying yes, yes, yes. We got about 500, emojis with the love and yes and hand claps. So this has just been an absolute delight. For more about Dr. Nicole Johnson, please visit urbanhealingcounseling.com. And this podcast will also be on our YouTube channel. Thanks again, Dr. Nicole.
Thank you for having me.